A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You ever have one of those moments where you're watching the news, seeing a map of a conflict zone with those big red and blue arrows, and you think, man, I really hope the guy in charge has a better map than this?
It is a terrifying thought if they do not, Corn. But luckily, the reality of high-level military intelligence is light years beyond what we see on a cable news crawl. Today's prompt from Daniel is diving right into that gap. He's asking about the intensity, the frequency, and the sheer depth of the information flow to national leaders during wartime. How often do they actually get briefed? Is it once a day? Is it every hour? And how much do they actually know that we don't?
It's a great question because we usually only see the polished version. We see the president behind the resolute desk or a prime minister giving a televised address. We don't see the 3 a.m. secure iPad notification or the frantic briefing in the Situation Room basement. By the way, fun fact for the listeners. Google Gemini 3 Flash is actually writing our script today, so if we sound extra sharp, you know why.
Or if I start reciting code, you'll know who to blame. But jumping into Daniel's question, the first thing to realize is that the daily in Presidential Daily Brief, or PDB, becomes a bit of a polite fiction during an active war. In peacetime, sure, it's a morning routine. You have your coffee, you read the highly classified highlights of what the intelligence community found overnight, and you move on with your day. But the second boots hit the ground, or missiles start flying, that cadence shatters.
It has to, right? I mean, if you're only getting updated once every 24 hours while a battle is unfolding in real time, you're basically a spectator. You aren't leading, you're just reading history a day late.
Well, not exactly in the sense of agreeing, but rather looking at the mechanism. During a crisis, the flow becomes constant. We saw this during the 2011 raid on the Bin Laden compound. President Obama and his team weren't just waiting for a morning report. They were in the Situation Room receiving updates essentially every 30 minutes. When you have high-stakes tactical operations, the briefing isn't a document anymore. It's a live feed of data, signals intelligence, and drone video.
And that brings up an interesting tension. If you're the leader, how do you keep from getting sucked into the tactical soda straw? Like, if I'm the president, do I really need to know that Sergeant Smith just turned a corner on a compound in Pakistan? Or does that actually hurt my ability to make strategic decisions?
That is the eternal struggle of command and control. There's a famous story about Lyndon B. Johnson during the Vietnam War. He used to go down to the White House Situation Room in the middle of the night, sometimes in his pajamas, to read the cables, the raw telegraphic reports coming in from the front. He was obsessed with the minute details, even down to specific bombing targets. Military historians generally argue that was a disaster. He was trying to be a general from a basement thousands of miles away, and it clouded his strategic judgment.
It's the ultimate micromanager's dream and a strategist's nightmare. But let's talk about the modern version of this. Daniel mentioned the Stavka in Ukraine. That's a term we've been hearing a lot lately. How does that differ from, say, the way a US president interacts with the Pentagon?
The Stavka is essentially a Supreme Council of the High Command. It's a model that dates back to the World Wars, but President Zelensky has modernized it. They meet almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. It's not just a briefing where someone talks at the leader. It's a synchronization meeting. You have the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the Head of Intelligence, the Defense Minister, and the political leadership all in one room or on one secure line. They aren't just looking at what happened, they are approving the next 48 hours of movement.
So, compared to us poor rubes watching the news, how much deeper is that understanding? When I see a report saying heavy fighting in Bakhmut, What is Zelensky or US President seeing on their screen at that exact same moment?
The difference is staggering. When the media says heavy fighting, they are usually basing that on a few things: social media videos from soldiers, official press releases that are intentionally vague, and maybe some commercial satellite imagery that's a few hours old. A national leader is looking at something called the Common Operational Picture, or COP.
Sounds like a fancy PowerPoint.
It's more like a God mode map in a video game, but with real lives. On a secure system like the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, which we call JWICS or CyberNet, they can see the exact location of their own units via Blue Force tracking. They see red icons representing enemy units that have been identified by everything from high-altitude Global Hawk drones to intercepted radio transmissions. They aren't guessing if a brigade is engaged. They know the brigade has 64% of its ammunition left, that its commander is requesting a medevac for 12 specific soldiers, and that the enemy across from them is speaking a specific dialect that suggests they are fresh conscripts from a specific region.
That's a level of granularity that would actually make my head explode. It's not just the war is going well. It's Unit X is low on fuel, and the bridge at coordinate Y is rigged with explosives. But does having all that data actually lead to better decisions? Or does it just give leaders a false sense of certainty?
That's the fog of war problem. Even with all the sensors in the world, intelligence is still a mosaic. You might have a clear picture of where the enemy tanks are, but you don't necessarily know why they are there. This is where the depth of understanding becomes a double-edged sword. A leader gets the raw intelligence, the intercepted phone call of a Russian general complaining about his boots. The media gets the curated version, but the raw stuff can be misleading.
Right, because the media version has actually been through a filter. A journalist, hopefully, has tried to verify it. A leader is seeing the fire hose. I remember reading about the 1991 Gulf War. President Bush was getting these massive targeting packets twice a day. He knew exactly which bunkers were being hit before the planes even took off. Meanwhile, we were all watching Peter Arnett on CNN reporting on explosions in Baghdad with no clue what was actually being targeted.
And that latency is key. During the 1991 war, the public was seeing the result, the flashes over the skyline. Bush was seeing the intent. He knew the air tasking order. He knew that at 8:02 hours, a specific stealth fighter was designated to hit a specific telecommunications node. That lead time is what defines the leader's perspective. They are living in the future compared to the public. By the time you see it on the news, the leader has already moved on to the third order effects of that event.
It's like playing a game of chess where one player sees the board as it is now, and the other player is seeing a photo of the board from 3 moves ago, which makes it really hard for the public to judge a leader's performance in real time, doesn't it? We're critiquing yesterday's news while they're reacting to tomorrow's threats.
It creates a massive accountability gap. Think about the 2003 Iraq invasion. The public was watching embedded reporters on tanks. It felt very immediate. But those reporters only knew what was happening 500 yards in front of that specific tank. The leadership in the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center, was seeing the entire theater. They knew the Iraqi divisions in the south were surrendering en masse before the reporters even reached the first city.
So, let's get into the how of this. Daniel asked how many times a day they get updated. If we're talking about a major conflict involving US forces, what does the actual schedule look like for the president?
In a high-intensity conflict, it's a tiered system. You have the PDB in the morning, which is the strategic overview. Then you likely have a SVTS, a secure video teleconference with the combatant commanders. If we're talking about the Middle East, that's the head of CENTCOM. That happens at least once a day, usually timed to the battle rhythm of the headquarters on the ground. But below that, the Situation Room staff is monitoring the flash messages.
Flash messages? That sounds like something from a spy novel.
It's a real classification of precedence. In military communications, you have routine, priority, operational immediate, and flash. A flash message is supposed to be processed and delivered within 10 minutes. If a major event happens, a ship is hit, a high-value target is spotted, that bypasses the daily schedule. The National Security Advisor is briefed instantly, and they decide whether to wake the president. So the answer to how many times a day is really once formally and then as many times as the world breaks.
I'm curious about the format of these updates. Is it all just digital maps and text? Because I'm a visual guy. If I'm the leader, I want to see the footage. I want to see the drone feed.
They absolutely see the feeds. During the Libya operations in 2011, there were reports of the White House team watching live predator feeds of convoys. But there's a danger there. General McChrystal once talked about digital dunking, where commanders and leaders get so addicted to the live video that they start trying to direct the movements of individual squads. It takes a lot of discipline for a president to say, I am seeing this guy with a rocket launcher on my screen, but I need to trust the 19-year-old corporal on the ground to deal with it.
It's the ultimate test of staying in your lane. But let's look at the understanding part of Daniel's prompt. We've established they have more data. But do they have more truths? I mean, look at the Vietnam War or the early years of the war in Afghanistan. The official briefings were often full of body counts and district stability scores that turned out to be totally disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, reporters on the ground were writing stories saying, hey, this isn't working.
That is the intelligence failure trap. And it's a brilliant point, Korn. Sometimes the media actually has a better understanding of the vibe or the human reality of a war. Because they aren't looking at a digital map, they are talking to a grieving mother or a frustrated soldier. A leader is getting information that has been sanitized as it moves up the chain of command. A colonel doesn't want to tell a general that his mission failed. A general doesn't want to tell the Joint Chiefs. By the time it reaches the president, the heavy fighting might be described as consolidating gains.
So the media is the bottom-up view and the leader is the top-down view. The media sees the trees, the leader sees the forest. But if the forest is on fire and the leader's sensors only show increased thermal activity, they might miss the fact that the trees are actually screaming.
That's where the best leaders look for alternative analysis. They read the OSIT, the open source intelligence. They actually look at what the media is saying to see if it contradicts their classified briefings. If the CIA says a city is secure, but a reporter on Twitter is posting a video of a tank burning in the town square, the president has a very uncomfortable question for the CIA director at the next briefing.
Which brings us to the 2022 Ukraine invasion. That was a watershed moment for this, wasn't it? The US was actually using its deep understanding to brief the public via the media. They were declassifying intelligence in real time to preempt Russian moves.
That was a fascinating shift in the information architecture. Normally, the depth of a leader's knowledge is a closely guarded secret, but the Biden administration decided to weaponize that depth. They were saying, we know they are going to stage a false flag operation on Tuesday. They were essentially giving the public a peek at the PDB. It showed just how many days or weeks ahead the intelligence community actually is. They didn't just know that. Russia would invade, they knew the specific units and the specific axes of attack.
It's wild because it basically turned the whole world into a briefing room. But for the average person, how do we handle this? If we know we're always 48 hours behind and only seeing 10% of the picture, how do we even begin to form an educated opinion on a conflict?
I think the takeaway is a certain level of epistemic humility. When you see a headline, you have to realize it's a snapshot of a very small part of the elephant. The leaders are seeing the whole elephant, but they might be seeing it through a distorted lens. For us, the key is looking for structural clues rather than event clues.
What do you mean by that?
Instead of focusing on who won this specific hill today, look at the logistics, look at the diplomatic movements. Those are things that the media is actually quite good at tracking. If a country is running out of artillery shells, you'll see it in the trade data and the frantic diplomatic pleas long before it shows up as a loss on a military map. The depth of a leader's knowledge is mostly about tactical specifics, names, dates, coordinates. The breadth of the situation is often visible to all of us if we know where to look.
That's a good way to frame it. The leader knows the what, but the why is often something we can all see if we pay attention. I want to go back to the frequency thing, though. Daniel asked about detailed updates. Is there a point of diminishing returns? Like, if you're getting briefed 10 times a day, is your brain just oatmeal by 5 p.m.?
Decision fatigue is a massive factor. There's a reason why the National Security Council exists. Their job is to be the filter. They take the 10,000 data points and turn them into 3 options for the president. If the president is doing the filtering himself, he's failing. The intensity of a wartime briefing cycle is really about the intensity of the staff. The leader should only be intensifying their involvement at decision nodes.
Like, do we cross the 38th parallel? Or do we launch this raid?
Everything else is just situational awareness. It's background noise that helps you understand the context of the big decisions, but the actual progress of operations is usually managed by the generals. The leader's briefing is about, are the political objectives being met by these military actions? If the goal is to pressure a regime to negotiate, and the military is just blowing up empty buildings, the leader needs to know that gap exists.
So, to answer Daniel's question directly, a leader is getting briefed formally at least once or twice a day, but the information flow is functionally continuous. They are seeing the intent and the raw data, while we see the result and the narrative. And the depth of their understanding is like comparing a 4K livestream to a grainy Polaroid taken last week.
That is a very fair summary. The classification gap is real, and it's not just about secrets, it's about the speed of the pipeline. The military has spent billions of dollars to make sure that a sensor in a desert can talk to a screen in DC in seconds. The media is still relying on humans to move, talk, and upload. That latency gap is where the real difference in understanding lives.
It's also about the integrated nature of it. A leader's briefing doesn't just have military stuff, it has the economic impact, the reaction of allies, the chatter in the enemy's capital. It's a holistic view. The media, by its nature, is siloed. You have a war correspondent and an economics reporter, and they rarely talk to each other. The leader's briefing is where all those lines cross.
And that brings us to the practical side of this for the listeners. When you're trying to parse the news during a conflict, remember the source timing focus, triangle. The leaders have classified sources, real-time timing, and a strategic focus. You have open sources, delayed timing, and a human interest focus. If you try to use your human interest news to make strategic predictions, you're going to be wrong almost every time.
It's like trying to predict the outcome of a Super Bowl by only looking at the facial expressions of the fans in the third row. You're seeing something real, but it's not the thing that's actually deciding the game.
Perfect analogy. Well, you said we were only allowed one analogy per episode, so I'll give you that one. It's a great way to think about the OSINT community too. One of the reasons open source intelligence has become so popular lately, and we've seen this in the Ukraine and Middle East conflicts, is that people are trying to close that depth gap. They are using commercial satellites and social media tracking to try and build their own common operational picture that rivals what the leaders have.
And they're getting surprisingly close in some areas. I've seen OSINT accounts on Twitter that identify a missile launch before the official government channels even acknowledge it.
They are closing the timing gap, but they still struggle with the intent and capability gap. You can see a missile launch on a thermal satellite, but you don't know if that was a mistake, a test, or the start of a massive barrage. The leader, through signals intelligence, might actually hear the command to fire before the button is even pressed. That is the depth that Daniel is asking about. It's the ability to get inside the enemy's decision cycle.
So, as we look at the future, how does this change? If AI starts synthesizing these briefings, like Gemini is doing for us right now, does the leader get Moore's deep, or does the AI just become another filter that can be biased or wrong?
That is the big question for the next decade. We're moving toward algorithmic command. Imagine an AI that scans every drone feed, every radio intercept, and every social media post in a theater and creates a single summary of reality. It would be incredibly efficient, but if the AI misses a subtle cultural nuance, like the vibe we talked about earlier, it could lead a leader to a catastrophic decision with a high degree of confidence.
I am 99% sure we should invade, Mr. President. My sentiment analysis of the enemy's radio traffic shows high levels of fear. Meanwhile, the enemy is just pretending to be scared because they know you're listening.
That's the second order effect that keeps intelligence officers up at night. The deeper your understanding, the more vulnerable you are to sophisticated deception. If you think you're seeing the raw truth, you're a perfect target for someone who can fake that truth.
Man, I'm glad my biggest decision today is whether to have a second snack. Being a national leader sounds exhausting. You're drinking from a fire hose of information, half of which might be a lie, and the other half is so detailed it makes you want to micromanage a platoon in a ditch.
It's a heavy burden, and I think understanding the architecture of how they get that information makes you realize why they look so aged after 4 years in office. It's not just the stress, it's the sheer volume of reality they have to process every single hour.
Well, I think we've given Daniel a pretty solid deep dive into the nerve center of wartime leadership. It's a lot more than just a morning meeting. It's a constant high-stakes battle for situational awareness.
It really is. And I think the takeaways for everyone listening are pretty clear. First, recognize the latency gap. What you see on the news is a reflection of the past. Second, understand the classification gap. Leaders have access to the why and the intent in a way we just don't. And third, develop that epistemic humility. Don't assume you have the whole picture just because you've seen a few viral clips.
Practical advice for a complicated world. I like it. Before we wrap up, I want to say thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do these deep dives without that infrastructure.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the weird and the technical, do us a favor and leave a review on whatever app you're using to listen. It actually makes a huge difference in helping other curious people find the show.
We'll be back next time with whatever weirdness Daniel throws our way.
Catch you then.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts.